Facilities before and you've never seen my beautiful face, that's because members in Bucks County. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge individuals who have been working to bring this together. First, I'd like to honor our Executive Dean of our campuses, Jim Sell. I want to say thank you, wave your hand, Jim. Long time. Our director of the Epstein campus, Rose Cooper. Rose Cooper, want to thank her very much. I also want to high five and acknowledge our own campus safety department, our Chief of Police, Dennis McCauley, and our Assistant Chief of Police, Mark Moore. Let's give a round of applause to all of our. And then, you know, everybody has a boss. including me. I have a boss that's a 15-member board, and I'm happy to acknowledge a current sitting trustee, Trustee Shams. Will you please stand? Trustee Shams from the Board of Directors, Board of Trustees. And then my sweetheart, Trustee Emeritus Garney Morris. I want to acknowledge him for all of his service. As I go to my seat, I do want to acknowledge our Associate Vice President over External Affairs and Government, Kevin Antoine, who's at the back of the room. And there's some other things that I can say and do, but we have 1 hour, right, Bill? Hour and a half. All right, and so I will leave the introductions to Professor Pezza, but I will say this.
What's up, everyone? Connor OHanlon here for another episode of the Greater Society podcast, and I'm going to mute this. Sorry about the introduction here. This is not my normal live time, so my mic had a glitch yet again. But today we are covering live the Ashley Ehasz Brian Fitzpatrick debate here in PA's first congressional district. You were seeing there live the introduction, and I will try to show the chat on Facebook because that's going to be horrible. But this debate is taking place this is a crazy day to be doing this. So this is a debate here. I'm going to share my screen. So this is a debate that is going to be happening between, and we see Tom Sofield here for the Levittown Now. I don't know that he knows that I'm covering this for him or with him using his stream. Sorry, readjusting everything here. So this is at the Bucks County Community College at the lower end. You can see is the crowd. Ashley and Brian will be up here, and this is at Bucks County Community College. This will be a big debate, and I'm excited to cover it. I'm excited to have it on here. Please drop comments, let people know what you think about this debate, and as we go through this, I probably won't talk nearly as much as I normally would on an episode, and I would just kind of interject, and I will give you my thoughts at the end. So, without further ado, I'm going to let the debate happen here and check the volume.
This is not Facebook. This is hands-on town hall, people from the community getting together. Our candidates are incumbent Republican Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick and his Democratic challenger, Ashley Ehasz. For the benefit of the viewing public, the candidates appear live, obviously, before a live audience. And as I announced earlier, the
please let me know if it's too loud.
Levittown Now and WBCB will be live streaming this and broadcasting it later as well. This debate, I want to thank again Jim Sell, our executive dean for both the Upper and Lower Bucks campuses, and Rose Cooper, our campus director, and Damon Hennicott for all the technical supplies and services that he offers to make this possible. Thank you very much. This debate will last 75 minutes. Each candidate is allocated 2 minutes for an opening address. They will be followed by questions and a 1-minute closing statement. The order of speaking will alternate. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the same question and will be allocated 1 minute for a rebuttal. I reserve the right to ask a follow-up if warranted. Jared Beyer, a student in our American National Government course, will be our timekeeper. He will display a yellow card for the candidates when 30 seconds remain in the speaker's time allotment.
This is an interesting thing here, just to note for everybody, is that nobody ever listens to the time restraints. So when they put up that, and I'm looking at my phone as I'm going through this, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen during this debate, I think, and just the back and forth. So, with that being said, you'll see the yellow and the red, and they'll blow right past it. Both of them will. It's not just like, oh, just Brian will do it or just Ashley will do it. They both will do it. And I sat right here in this front row in the primary debate in 2020, so I know that people just blow right through it.
Refrain from applause or outbursts of any kind, except now as we welcome our
that
candidates.
that won't be adhered to. They want to keep it to not nobody clapping, but there will be clapping. I can guarantee you that.
I want to congratulate these two individuals. It's not easy to put your name out there before the public, and be away from family, be away from friends, go through the grind of the campaign. And I know that all of us here appreciate what you do to the democratic process. The order of speaking was determined by coin toss, and we'll begin with a 2-minute opening statement by Brian Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Dr. Ganther. Thank you to the Bucks County Community College campus, the amazing students here. Ashley, welcome to Bucks County, my home. And we're going to talk about a couple of things today. Number one.
We're not going to do that, guys. We're not.
We're going to start by introducing myself. For most of the people who know me here, I have spent my entire life here in
What a
Bucks County.
scumbag move.
I was born here, I was raised here, I went to grade school in Levittown, high school in Fairless Hills, college right down the road at LaSalle University, and my graduate program, both my JD and my MBA at Penn State. And I served my entire professional career both as a U.S. attorney, special U.S. attorney, federal prosecutor, and as an FBI special agent, which took me coast to coast domestically from New York City to Los Angeles and in between throughout Europe and Africa and Asia and the Middle East, working both domestic corruption, Russian counterintelligence in my assignment in Ukraine, and as an Al-Qaeda interrogator embedded with U.S. Special Forces as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. What do I believe? Essentially, as the leader of the bipartisan bloc in Congress, the problem solvers, 29 Democrats, 29 Republicans, we believe in two-party solutions. Not single-party solutions, two-party solutions. We don't believe in judging people based on the box they checked on the voter registration form when they're 18. We understand that the single biggest threat to democracy and to our national security is
The
hyperpartisanship.
Republican Party.
That is what we believe. And why do we believe that? And why is it important? Because as a member of the House Intelligence Committee, where we see the threats up close and personal every day, Xi Jinping, amongst most of them, will tell you American democracy will never be beaten externally. It can only be beaten and taken down from within. And that is why bipartisanship has to be the driving force that sustains our 246-year experiment. And that's what I believe in. That'll be the theme of this debate. You're going to hear a lot of two-party solutions versus single-party solutions. I yield back, Bill.
Thank you. Ehasz?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today.
She's quiet.
And to the organizers for putting this all together. My name is Ashley Ehasz. I was born to a single mother who herself was born to a single mother. I grew up moving all around southeastern Pennsylvania, trying to stay one step ahead of eviction notices.
She's really
trying
quiet.
to figure out where the next meal on our table would come from. So at 17, with an age waiver in hand, I joined the Army because, like so many in our country, that was my pathway forward to stability and opportunity. I was really lucky to get into West Point, but I only got there because of my community. My next door neighbor, who was a high school teacher, saw some potential in me and made sure he helped me with my application. So that sense of community support is really important to me and my campaign. When I was in the service, I was an attack helicopter pilot, but most importantly, I was a commander.
Somebody's fumbling with the mic here.
I commanded several hundred
That ain't me.
soldiers overseas and right here at home. And it was in those years where I learned how to make a decision in a crisis. And make no mistake, we are finding ourselves in a moment of crisis in our country. There are too many families living paycheck to paycheck and struggling to afford the basic necessities. Millions of women, including myself, were made second-class citizens with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And in the year following January 6th, we have seen our voting rights, our reproductive rights, and our economic rights stripped away from us. And I do not think that that is a coincidence. So right now, we need a leader who will stand up and defend our country and our community, and that is exactly why I'm running for Congress. So thank you all for joining us here today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
I'm just muting while they clap because it's so loud.
person who walks up to me says, why didn't you ask? Or I can't believe you didn't ask. So let me tell you now, state, okay? We've got as many questions as we can get into 75 minutes, and they reflect, we believe, what was mailed to us when we solicited input. Okay, so the first question, okay. Since the recent Dobbs decision leaving abortion issues to the states, we have seen legislative outcomes or proposals that range from all-out bans with no exceptions in some states to others that permit abortion up to 24 weeks or even longer if the life of the mother is at risk. It is rare that we see such legal diversity on a matter of such consequence. So the question is, should the United States Congress codify a national abortion standard, and if so, what should that standard be? And we start with Ms. Ehasz.
It is not lost on me that I am standing here on this stage today before all of you as a second-class citizen, as a combat veteran who is willing to die to defend our country, and am now a second-class citizen in that very same country because of a decision by the Supreme Court and a subsequent vote against the Women's Health Protection Act by Brian Fitzpatrick. I'm not an equal on this stage when it comes to my reproductive rights. And when we look bigger picture, the loss of Roe v. Wade affects so many folks right here in Pennsylvania's first. The largest demographic that lives at or below the poverty line in PA-01 is women aged 25 to 34. So that means the loss of reproductive rights will hit this group the hardest. Those who are already struggling economically the most will be hardest hit by this decision. Let's be clear, the conversation around whether or not a woman should have a child or when needs to be made between a woman and her doctor, not a woman and Brian. That is not right. And also, the loss of protections of Roe v. Wade has hurt every woman in uniform. Many folks don't understand that active duty soldiers do not get to choose where they live. So every woman serving our country right now who has stood up in an all-volunteer army may be stationed in a state where Roe and the right to safe and legal abortions do not exist. So we are putting those who have stepped up to serve our country directly in harm's way. And let's be very clear. Now that Roe is lost at the federal level, we have a candidate for governor, Doug Mastriano, who wants to end it right here in Pennsylvania. So from where I am standing, Brian Fitzpatrick and Doug Mastriano are one and the same.
Yep.
If we do not stand up and fight for our protections again.
There you go. I was going to say it exactly that same way. That's exactly the message she has to get out there.
HR 36. This is not theoretical. It's what we voted on, what I voted on the floor of the House. HR 36, for everybody here, allowed for 5 months of legality by choice. 5 months, and 9 months of legality in the cases of the exception or where medical necessity arises. That encompasses 75+% of our community support that. And the question that has to be asked to Ashley, by the press, by moderators, for everybody on this question is, where is the line drawn? Because the overwhelming majority of our community and the overwhelming majority of people in the United States of America believe in legality, just like, by the way, most European countries, which are somewhere between 15 and 20 weeks, for the most part. They support legality.
We've gone over the bullshit and that's that.
That limits, not bans, actually limits. Because Pennsylvania, by the way, the law that we've been living with here for decades, Ashley would consider that a ban. Because instead of 20 weeks, it's 24 weeks. Otherwise, it's basically the same. In fact, Pennsylvania law has even more restrictions. They have parental consent, parental notification, 24-hour waiting periods. And I think a fair question, Bill, to ask.
Almost more restrictive than getting a gun.
Pennsylvania law was put on the floor of the House. I would support that if that was the bill. But according to everything you've been saying on this, Ashley, everything is a ban unless it is complete, there's no legislation at any point during the entirety of the 9 months. And just so you know, Ashley, that reflects the viewpoint of 1 of 5 voters in this district. 1 in 5 believe in no restrictions ever.
We have follow-up, 1 minute each. I'm going to remind you, the original question was, would you support a federal codified law regarding abortion to take the discrepancies from states?
I'm going to speak to every woman watching and in the crowd right now. I will remind you that we all know that the decision to whether or not to have a child should be made between a woman, a doctor, her faith, her family. It should not have to consult Brian Fitzpatrick. We must codify the right to choose at the federal level. H.R. 36 is an abortion ban. It had no provisions for making sure a woman who had a non-viable fetus after 20 weeks would be able to get the health care she needed. That woman would be forced to carry that pregnancy all the way, knowing that her physical health, or the physical health of that child, would be under threat. It also criminalized doctors who performed abortion. That is a fear state. We have
Yes.
to protect a woman's right to choose at the federal level immediately.
Yes. Now the framing of a ban is deliberate. Oh, he's answering.
Current Pennsylvania law, anything that's not 8 months and 29 days, regardless of the medical necessity, in Ashley's view is a ban. That is just not true. And that is not where the majority of Bucks Countyans and Montgomery Countyans are. That's not where the majority of Americans are. We believe in legality in the beginning stages and limits, not bans, but limits, reasonable limits in the later terms. That's the bridge building approach. We cannot take, with all the challenges we're feeling in America right now, dealing with America, we need bridge building solutions.
He's not looking to build a bridge, though. That's not the case. That's not the
If
case.
you're going to clap after every comment, we're going to be a long time reading this question.
He's
I'm
not.
going to ask you a follow-up. And that is specifically, I'm getting the hint that H.R. 36 would be what you would support, but I'll give you a chance to respond to it. What specifically would you put in a federal codified law about abortion?
We had that in
Bro.
Roe, and that is what we must go back to.
Yes. Yes. There you go. That's it. That's the answer.
What was viability? Viability is between 20 and 22 weeks.
You can hear everyone groaning.
This question is on the economy, and it's long, so bear with me. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. economy gained 260,000 jobs in September, dropping the unemployment rate to 3.5%, returning unemployment to pre-pandemic levels. But inflation exceeds 8%, with price increases attributed to several factors, including pandemic-related issues, fiscal and monetary stimulus packages, supply shortages, price gouging, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Fed has increased interest rates to slow the economy and hints at doing so again.
Yep.
In this environment, what should Congress do to ease the economic burden on Americans and ensure steady, non-inflationary growth? Can we start with
Remember that the Fed is an
First thing we have to do
independent
is
body.
stop overheating the economy. Larry Summers, who is Barack Obama's economic advisor,
Larry Summers is a right-winger.
with both the American Rescue Plan and the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. He's worried about overheating the economy. The literal Webster's definition, economic definition of inflation, is too much money chasing too few goods. And when you have supply chain disruptions and labor shortages on the supply side, where largely because of the pandemic, but largely because of policies that were bad, we have labor shortages across
Like
the
what?
board and supply chain disruptions across the board. And then on the demand side of the equation, you're pumping endless amounts of money into the economy. This is no secret that this was going to happen. Larry Summers predicted this a long time ago. When myself and Joe Manchin were working out the details of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which we did get across the finish line, this was always on the top of our mind. To Joe's credit, it was on the top of his mind with regard to that first infrastructure bill. But this is a math problem, and inflation does not happen on its own. Inflation is a result of bad policy.
It's inversely related with the unemployment rate.
Overspending and not being mindful of fiscal and monetary policy with regard to the Fed and interest rates, that's how we've gotten here. So how do we get out of it? We have to fix the labor shortages. It's a long conversation. Fix the supply chain disruptions, long conversation, and be much more mindful of federal spending and all the money we're injecting into the economy.
Remember,
Thank
the
you.
Fed is an independent
Yeah.
body. It is not controlled by the
So
president
answering
or
this,
Congress.
I'm going to first address an issue that Mr. Fitzpatrick has already brought up. He stood here in his opening remarks and attacked a veteran for where she has had to live and grow up. As someone who is stumped for Dr. Oz, who's not even from
Yes.
this state and owns more houses than
Yes.
any of us probably combined, he stood here and attacked me, a veteran. And let's talk about the realities, the economic realities of why families get split and have to move around. I was born to teenage parents who didn't have a hope in the world, and they split early, and my folks went their separate ways. And the reason why I moved around so much as a kid and spent time with my dad in New Jersey and here in Pennsylvania with my mom and then joined the Army, when I graduated high school right here in Pennsylvania, I was kicked out of the house and I did not have a home to go back to. So for the first time in my life, I wanted to build a relationship with my father and went and lived with him as I joined the service. And Brian Fitzpatrick knows that wherever you join the service is where you register to vote. It is real family problems of what economic instability is and where you need to be.
Yes.
So
He doesn't know what that feels like.
Moving around a lot in my life when my family and I did not have the resources we needed. Let's talk about the resources family needs. Families need. One, we know the cost of gas right now is incredibly high. He had the opportunity to vote against gas and oil companies' price gouging. He
Never
did
will.
not stop them from doing that.
He never
so
will.
Everyone who's facing that right now, that is something you were dealing with at the hands of Brian Fitzpatrick. We also know that one of the largest sources of debt for families is health care. The Inflation Reduction Act had provisions to allow Medicare to negotiate for drug prices.
Insulin
Brian
in particular.
Fitzpatrick voted against that.
Yes, he did.
Most recently, Kevin McCarthy has said he will end Social Security if the GOP gains control of the House again. And that includes provisions for those who are on pensions and 401ks. They will lose their Social Security. You want to know who has pensions? Those in unions. This is not a party that stands up for the economic rights of anyone, even if it's a kid struggling to make ends meet with their parents or those who are struggling to make ends meet now.
Yes, that was a great
Before
answer.
1 minute rebuttal, I want to remind you, the question is specifically,
Great answer.
what can we do to ease the burden on Americans and ensure steady, non-inflationary growth?
That is a question, but I have to respond, Bill, because there's a lot to unpack there. So actually, the issue of residency, yes, I too moved around. I respect everybody who serves. But you never lived here a day. You never voted here a day. So if you're going to sit here and tell us you didn't pick this district solely you can run for office, you moved here 11 months ago, you announced your candidacy 2 weeks later, of course we respect people who serve. I myself traveled the world serving my country, but I came back home to where my home is, where I grew up. That's why I ran for Congress here. Second, on the question of energy and price gouging.
Actually, he ran
if you're
because
gonna
his
sit here and tell
brother,
us
but-
that our cutbacks on domestic energy, shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline, slowing down the permitting process.
Keystone
which
XL
now
pipeline didn't
is
actually impact
depending
gas
on
prices.
OPEC, and countries like Venezuela, a government we don't even recognize as legitimate. That's the problem. We have all the energy here to be not only energy independent, but to be a net energy exporter. We could export energy to Europe.
We
so
are
that
an
they don't have to be
exporter.
dependent on Russia during this cold winter at the time Russia's committing genocide in Ukraine. With regard to drug prices, actually, I voted for H.R. 3, the most expansive pharmaceutical reform bill in American history, one of 2 Republicans to do it. And with regard to unions, they're all endorsing me, actually, including the National AFL-CIO, because they know I have their back when it comes to Social Security and Medicare.
Ehasz?
I believe in the saying, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And I think Brian needs to check in with his boss, who again, just this last week said, if the GOP gains control of the House, if we elect a majority of GOP members, they will sunset, that means end Social Security for everyone with a 401k and a pension. That is those in unions. They are no friends of unions, and we need to keep that in mind as we make our choices on election day.
Yeah, the endorsements he's gotten are
We're a little bit
ridiculous.
ahead of time, which is good because I have to ask a follow-up.
And the unions are doing it
I don't think
for
people
reasons
in
because he's an
executive
incumbent.
district care where our congressman lived for 15 years and 15 minutes. They care about solutions to our economic problems. So we're going to do it again. In 1 minute each, can you please tell me specifically what you would do to ease the economic burden on our citizens and ensure steady, non-inflationary.
Another crack at it.
Yes, so economics are a combination of tax policy, regulatory policy, and monetary policy. Tax policy, for all 3, by the way, the key is finding the point of equilibrium. So with tax rates, you have to find that point of equilibrium, so tax rates aren't so onerous and that they're crushing economic growth, but not so deficient that they're bleeding revenue to the government. Same with regulations. You want regulations that protect labor and environmental standards, as we have done very well here in the United States compared to other countries, but they're not so duplicative and onerous and excessive that they crush economic growth. And then the third piece is monetary policy. That's where the Fed comes in, and that's why it's important that they understand the dynamics of supply and demand, they understand the futures market, and they understand where that point of equilibrium is with regard to the interest rate to make sure that all 3 are acting in harmony together.
But he didn't answer the question there whatsoever.
When I look at
He just explained what the policies are, like in theory are.
Child care. So let's make sure folks are helped out there. They also need to not have the rich with some tax cuts. So I will overturn the Trump tax cuts. which, by the way, Brian voted for. And I will also protect Social Security. I cannot say that enough. The GOP sees the money that you all have paid into Social Security as the government's.
And Medicare.
It's not.
Throw that in there
It's
too.
yours, and I will make sure that is protected.
And yeah, it is very disappointing.
Um,
The PSE endorsement specifically is sad to see.
Remind the candidates that some of the things you're addressing in your comments are going to be addressed in later questions, so do the best you can to stick to the questions again. Okay. All right, question 3. Congress allocated $1.2 trillion for an infrastructure bill. Much of that money will go to generic projects across the country, like expanded broadband access, power grid improvements, and clean water systems. Much will also go towards specific projects in the various congressional districts. What specific projects will you advocate for the 1st Congressional District? Ms. Ehasz?
As someone who has served overseas and has been a logistics officer in addition to a pilot and a commander, I understand how important dollars towards infrastructure and supply chains are. When I look across our community, as we've discussed those in unions today, I know one of the most important things that folks here at PA-01 are dealing with is the transition forward into a good green infrastructure that will help move us forward and protect union jobs, but will also make sure we fight climate change. So we need to bring projects right here into Pennsylvania's first that will help those who are already in union jobs move forward and transition into good green infrastructure. So we look at expanding SEPTA further into PA-01. We need to build community centers and also make sure public transportation is really robust all throughout our district.
This is a bit of a weird
Yeah,
question.
I lead with broadband because it's technology, it's a way of the future. I think a lot of us saw during the pandemic how when we were engaged in remote learning, our children were struggling. Some people didn't have access to devices, some didn't have access to broadband, some didn't have access to either. And it posed additional stress on parents, teachers, and students to learn. So one of my big drivers, by the way, with this bill, which started with our Problem Solvers Caucus, this is a once-in-a-generation investment in infrastructure. People have been talking about investment in infrastructure for decades. We actually got it done. We got it done in an overwhelmingly bipartisan fashion when we met with Joe Manchin, with Governor Wolf, with Democrat and Republican members of the House and Senate and governors from across the country in Annapolis, and we came up with the nuts and bolts of the framework, which we got across the finish line. And because of that, Bucks is going to be getting a lot of this money back, by the way. Broadband, particularly in rural, in the upper part of the district, I would say. Bridge integrity, we are very, very structurally deficient in our bridges here in Pennsylvania at a level that is entirely unacceptable, one of the big drivers of me pushing this bill. And also, with regard to investing in green energy technologies, particularly solar and hydrogen, which we have a lot of great companies here in Bucks that are going to benefit. And obviously then the traditional roads, schools, and bridges, the hard infrastructure, things you can see, the things you can't see, water infrastructure, particularly in Warminster and Horsham,
Yeah, I was gonna
that have been
say.
suffering from a terrible PFAS contamination issue.
That's a big answer
that I
right
lead
there.
in that task force on the water cleanup project.
That's a weird. I'm muting it real quick. That's a weird question because the Congress people don't really get to delegate the funding of this.
And we're going to hear that a lot today. Don't be fooled by that. I don't know of many problems that the Problem Solvers Caucus has really solved, and keep in mind that he was able to name that caucus himself. Kind of funny. If I had chosen, I don't know, See-Through Walls Caucus, doesn't mean that it actually happens. So we look at helping folks here, right in Pennsylvania's first. We need
That's
to
a
make
good
sure
one.
infrastructure dollars come here for things like transportation, broadband, and yeah, making sure water is able to be safely drank. Because there are too many folks in our community that are excluded by the policies and procedures that Brian has currently put in place.
Bill?
Thank you. Yes.
Actually, I did not name the Problem Solvers Caucus. Where are you getting that?
Wait, we're not going to ask questions.
Well, it was, okay, let me just clarify. The Problem Solvers were created in 2010, long before I was in Congress. I don't know where that's coming from. And second, you're saying we got nothing done. How about the largest investment in infrastructure in a generation? How about the Keeping Our Community Safe Act, the first major gun violence prevention bill to pass in our lifetime? The largest investment in mental health resources in our lifetime. And perhaps the most personally proud moment for me was the Women's History Museum. The Smithsonian Mall has one spot left for one museum, and myself and Carolyn Maloney, in a bipartisan fashion, named at the Women's History Museum. It's going to dedicate itself to women's history throughout the United States. It's the last spot in the mall. How can you say we've got nothing done, actually? We are the one group in Congress where Democrats and Republicans sit down and talk. We talk to each other because we love our
Definitely
country.
talk.
Unlike the fringes on both the left and the right. I don't know what caucus you plan on joining. Clearly, it's not the bipartisan.
Okay, so since Congressman Fitzpatrick took an extra minute, we're going to go to Ms. Ehasz for an extra minute as well.
When I stand before you all here today, again, let me remind you, it is as a woman who was made a second-class citizen in the country I was willing to die to defend. And so I don't want to get caught up in this nitpicking, that nitpicking. I will address the issues at hand, and I will stand up for myself and those in this community. However, when we look at the folks in our community, what they need help with childcare. They need good transportation to and from jobs. They need job growth right here. They need more middle-class housing. And so when I say that the current elected official has not done those things for this community,
That's
I'm
true.
talking in facts.
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly, the designation of that funding from the infrastructure bill will be passed down to the states and then passed down to the candidates, passed down to local municipalities. The congressional people don't pick where the money is spent.
As opposed to what hasn't been done. Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, the Affordable Care Act, marketplace subsidies, all of that account for 25% of the federal budget in 2022, a $1.4 trillion. To what extent should we ensure that adequate health care as well as access to affordable drugs for all Americans continues? How do we continue to pay for such programs? And the second part is equally important as the first. We start with Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, I think it starts by preserving the ACA, which I've done every single time. Every single solitary time it's come up for a vote, I voted to protect it. Needs improvement, for sure, but I voted to protect it. And on the Social Security issue, I believe you mentioned, we have two pieces of legislation. Obviously, we have to...
Actually, I didn't mention Social Security. We will direct that. We will discuss that later.
Okay. Pharmaceuticals?
Pharmaceuticals.
H.R. 3, I was one of two Republicans. Basically, this bill would deal with importation, it would deal with innovation, and it provides caps for out-of-pocket expenses. And a big part of the problem is so-called PBMs, pharmaceutical benefit management programs that are, there's a lot of middle people inside the healthcare chain that get in between the doctor
Yes, there are.
relationship. There's health insurance companies, there's PBMs, there's a whole host of intermediaries that drive up the cost. So what we need to do, I believe, number one, is medical liability reform, particularly in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of the few states that has no cap on non-economic damages. I believe that needs to be capped at a reasonable amount, say $250,000, because the defensive practice of medicine is a significant cost driver to healthcare. And if pharmaceuticals develop a system that allows for innovation with amazing therapeutics that allow me to and my family to enjoy my brother for a few more years than we otherwise would have, Keytruda, a PD-1 inhibitor, that was through innovation, but also having caps so that people can afford these drugs that don't have insurance.
Thank you. Ms. Ehasz?
Particularly as a commander, I encountered so many of my soldiers who were already struggling financially to make ends meet, but were especially struggling with mental health in addition to physical health issues, whether it was trauma due to combat or just being...
I don't know what that squeaking is.
So we need to put more resources into mental health issues and treat them just as importantly as physical health issues. We need to do that by expanding the ACA, but also we need to make sure healthcare costs are lowered for families. And as I mentioned before, there's already a vote to make sure Medicare can negotiate drug prices. It was in a limited fashion, but it was a great start, and I will make sure that is continued when I'm in Congress. We also can make sure there is more research and development funding for that, put into creating generic drugs. And that is something that can help out folks. Right here in Pennsylvania's versus, we know healthcare is a major industry of ours. And the way we will pay for this is by rolling back the Trump tax cuts for the rich, because that is the reason why we are struggling so much as a country right now. And I will make sure those who are at the top 1% of earners in our country pay their fair share in taxes.
1 minute.
So second reference to the tax relief bill, Ashley, so I guess you would vote to raise everyone's taxes, it's clear, including the corporate tax rate. So that
Yes.
2017 bill, the United States of America had a corporate tax rate
Of
of
35%, which nobody
Highest in the
actually
world by a
paid.
mile.
Yeah, but nobody
Canada,
actually paid that.
18%,
That's
Ireland,
so disingenuous.
12.5%, Russia, for crying out loud, 20%. We had a 35% corporate tax rate, which is why it was very difficult to convince these American companies that had offshored their labor and manufacturing programs to bring it back, because they needed certainty and stability that they were not going to be priced out of the market.
You
Why
actually
we
get
want to
more
change
tax
that when it led to
deductions
this great
by
period
having
of economic growth in the past 2 decades, I don't know.
Having your
Is it
workforce
perfect?
here.
Of course not. None of these bills are. Can we fix it? Of course we can. But to completely roll everything back, particularly in this inflationary economy, would be a huge mistake.
Actually, taxation is actually a way to combat
It's also
inflation
coming back
realistically,
to
but
the statement I made earlier. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Brian just stood there and defended corporations and the top 1% of earners and what they're being taxed. When someone shows you
Good
who
point.
they are, believe them.
good point.
Thank you. We're going to discuss the debt limit later, as it may impact on Social Security, and it certainly will impact upon Medicare and Medicaid, but we'll get to that since neither one of you brought it up. Okay. Technology. Over the past year, we've seen the negative supply chain effect of America's dependence on microchips manufactured abroad. This is both an economic and national security issue. The same is true for much of the medication Americans rely upon. What should we do to make us less dependent on foreign productions of vital commodities? We start with Ms. Ehasz.
Again, as I've shared with you, when I was serving Iraq, I was a pilot, but also a logistics officer. So I understand how crucial it is to have robust and redundant supply chains. And as we look forward, one of the biggest lessons we learned from the pandemic was making sure we had those robust and redundant supply chains right here at home. And in Congress, I will make sure we have those systems in place. I will make sure we are making more things right here in America, because that helps out working families in Pennsylvania's first.
It
But
does.
also helps protect our country as a whole. And I shared towards the top of the discussion here that I see things like climate change as national security issues. As other countries move forward in developing technology and we become reliant on that technology, we put ourselves at a national security risk. So again, I will make sure we make more things right here at home and we're not dependent upon foreign entities for our own security and supplies.
That's good rhetorically, and it's also just the truth. That's
Yeah,
just a
there's an
factual
actual piece of
statement.
legislation to address it. It is a problem-solver bill. It's called the CHIPS Act. It not only passed the House, not only passed the Senate, but was signed into law by the President, and I was invited to the White House for that bill signing. $52 billion in investment in domestic supply chain production for semiconductors, which is probably the most important industry in the tech field. Back in 1990, the United States of America produced probably about 30% of the world's semiconductor supply. We now produce about 12%. Europe is about 8%. The continent of Asia is 70%. And of that 70%, about 80% of that 70% is produced on one island, Taiwan, at one company, TSMC, that is now in the crosshairs of the CCP's aggression. So the timing was very important. I think it was important that we invest in it.
The timing was
Intel has
very
already
late,
announced a
but
major operation
CHIPS Act is a
opening
good
up in
bill.
Ohio. TSMC, by the way, this Taiwanese company, is opening properties in Arizona. This is what we need to do. We need to onshore what we can, but we can't onshore. We have to nearshore, and nearshore them in democracies, freedom-loving democracies and not dictatorships. That's the key for semiconductors, for energy, and everything that's life-saving, life-sustaining, and a national security issue.
His rhetoric is funny to hear.
I appreciate hearing about the Problem Solvers Caucus once again, and that's great. But I also want to bring this conversation right back here at home, because we are thinking about national security. One way that we are, again, failing us in national security and making sure we can compete with foreign entities is, I don't know, maybe not making our women in uniform second-class citizens. So let's make that conversation more expansive. Let me remind you, as we talk about making sure we can stand up and defend ourselves and be on par economically or militarily with foreign entities, we have made every woman in uniform in this country a second-class citizen by overturning Roe v. Wade and taking their reproductive autonomy from them.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Semiconductors?
Yeah, question.
I thought we were talking about semiconductors. Yeah, I mean, it's not only important for domestic economic reasons. One Ford F-150 is over 1,000 semiconductors. It's important to appliances, but most importantly, it's in the heads of our Patriot missile defense system. It's in our satellites that allow for ISR capability. to keep our nation safe. Technology is incredibly important, which is why it's so important that we get our act together in the United States to protect the United States from the aggressive Chinese actions when it comes to this stuff. Because they want to replace the dollar as the world's currency standard. They want to become the tech domineer. Huawei is our 5G area. That's another big important area where we need to be independent. And the FBI just announced yesterday another arrest. By the way, to put in perspective, my former colleagues open about one case a week on the CCP threat, on counterintelligence and espionage cases, and it's all linked to the tech field. 5G, broadband, and semiconductors.
Yeah, it's almost like we should be
We have some
investing in
time
that
to
for a
ask
long
follow-up
time, but
question. We're going to be discussing China in more detail later, but for now, to what extent should the United States be prepared to defend Taiwan in the interim while we're waiting to become chip independent? Ehasz?
Again, as I've shared with you all, I was an actual commander overseas and here at home. I have served in combat. I have flown missions over Baghdad. I understand what it's like to make a decision to put American soldiers or other soldiers in harm's way. So as we look at escalating tensions with China, both economic and militarily, we need to evaluate each situation that we encounter with Taiwan, but also remember that we also need to not encourage aggression overseas, be it Russian or China, and make sure when the moment comes that we stand and defend those who have stood alongside us.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
As far, what's the question again?
To what extent should we be willing to defend Taiwan?
Taiwan. We need to do what we should be doing more with Ukraine. We're helping Ukraine a lot, but we need to be doing more. We need to do the same with Taiwan. The Taiwan Relations Act makes us contractually obligated to supply them with lethal military equipment. The consequences of the fall of Taiwan would be catastrophic, not just for the Asian markets, which would be at risk of collapse, but to the rest of the world. Like I said, with the semiconductor issue, it's not just that. Taiwan is on the cutting edge of so many technologies. They're a freedom-loving nation, and we have to defend them, much like we're defending Ukraine. We have to engage in military intelligence sharing. We have to provide them with all the military equipment they need, and we have to also provide them with our ISR satellite capability that will let them know what's happening before the CCP makes their next move.
Thank you. Take a break from the questions for a minute.
Actually, if I may respond to that.
Okay, and then the Congressman will as well. Go ahead.
I find it interesting that Brian just tied Taiwan and Ukraine together. Because also, while announcing that Social Security would be sunsetted if the GOP gains majority in the House, we will end, well, let me rephrase that. Kevin McCarthy and the GOP, Brian's boss, have made it clear that they will end support to Ukraine.
yep.
So if we have a GOP majority in the House, everything that we are doing to stand beside Ukraine, and then potentially Taiwan, as Brian mapped out for us, will be ended. The Ukrainians will be doomed if we gain a GOP majority in the House.
Not true.
And as someone who has served in harm's way, I understand the value of the support we are giving to Ukraine today and forward from here. Kevin McCarthy, Brian's boss, has made it crystal clear that he will end support to Ukraine. Do
Interesting.
not let Brian stand here and...
Let's see what his response is. Betsy, I see your comment.
Congressman, you have a minute for that, but we will be discussing Ukraine in more detail later.
Yeah. Is there anybody in the House or Senate that's not more for Ukraine than me, Ashley? I live there. Those are my friends. Those are my people. And I'm going to fight for them every last ounce and every last piece of energy that I have. I talked to Kevin about this. He's not going to do that. What he said was no blank checks, which, by the way, we shouldn't give a blank check to anybody. But we should have oversight over these things. Of course we should. That doesn't mean we're ever going to abandon our freedom-loving allies. I will not let it happen as long as I'm a member of that House.
Him stating that freedom-loving thing over and over again is a
Announcement,
rhetorical trick.
Following the debate, we
But
reserve room
I'm
105
gonna
for
mute this. Betsy, is Carolyn Avery a what's her polling? Is she on the ballot? What's the deal with that candidate then?
Okay. Immigration. I've been on this stage every 2 years since 2010. And every 2 years I ask the same question. I'm going to ask it again. We've raised the issue of immigration since 2010, and little has changed under Democratic and Republican administrations. Dreamers continue to dream, undocumented immigrants remain undocumented, borders remain porous, and policies toward asylum seekers seem undefined.
I'll try to put it louder when she
Let's not
talks.
spend time, please, let's not spend time talking about past failures. Instead, please tell us which specific policies we should pursue to fix this problem. We start with Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yep. The solution is right at the ready. We just need more people with courage to back it. It combines a border security provision, robust border security provision, that looks at the entire terrain of the 1,900 miles or so on the southern border and says what we need there, whether they be physical barriers or technology, heat sensors, motion detectors, aerial surveillance, infrared, where we can use those as force multipliers to assist the CBP, the Border Patrol, and the Coast Guard, the three entities responsible for border security, with their response time. Second, support the Border Patrol, the Coast Guard, and the CBP. Support them. Give them more funding so they can do their job. These people have an incredibly tough job. And third, marry that up with the DREAM Act, which I voted for. I voted for the DREAM Act. The way we need to fix immigration in this system is respect the dignity of immigrants. We are a nation of immigrants, but it's got to be legal immigration with a secure border. Just last week alone, 10 people were interdicted. These are just the people we caught that are either known or suspected terrorists on the southern border. You look at all the steps we took post 9/11 to say never again were we going to allow terrorists to infiltrate a cockpit and treat a commercial airliner like a guided missile. Look at all the things we did. We created the Department of Homeland Security, a brand new secretary level position, deployed federal air marshals across all the airlines, deployed sophisticated AT screening devices across all 450 airports in America. We said never again. And look at our border now. It is a complete and unmitigated disaster. Ronald Reagan gave a speech in September of 1980 at the base of the Statue of Liberty about the beauty of American immigration legally. That's what we have to get back to.
Let's see here. There's plenty of holes in what he just said, but
When
let's see what Ashley has
was
to
in
say.
the service, I served with folks of all different types of backgrounds, some who joined our military to gain citizenship. So as your Congresswoman, I will make sure DACA and Dreamers are protected at the federal level by codifying that. We must also create robust pathways to citizenship for those who are in our country, because we know that a diverse country is not only good for us as people and the American dream, but it's also good for our GDP, and that has been proven time and time again. And as we saw with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we left a lot of folks in the lurch because we had a broken and outdated SIV system, Special Immigrant Visa. So we need to make sure there's more funding and adjustments to that program, so that way, as folks are looking to come into our country, we have a good system to get them in here efficiently and get them out of harm's way. And when we look at our immigration quotas at large, a lot of those have been in place since the 1980s. It is time we address those, update them for today, and also make sure our broken and outdated systems have more funding, are revamped, and get folks into this country in a safe and efficient manner.
Let me drill down on this before we go into our one of our follow-ups, and you can have extra time because we're ahead, which is great.
Sorry for the swings
I
and
hear
volume here.
often that
I don't know why Ashley's
we
mic's so
can't do anything
quiet.
about the dreamers or the undocumented immigrants until we secure the borders. Seems like a reasonable position, except when I was in college, I took the obligatory spring break trip to Florida. Drove 1,000 miles down and 1,000 miles back. It was a long ride. And that's how long that border is on our southern tier. So how do we secure, and I know you've alluded to that, if solving the problem of immigrants here now is contingent upon securing that border, I think in 2030, we'll be back here asking the same question. I'd like to know your reactions.
Yeah, as I alluded to earlier, myself, Will Burr, Tony Gonzalez, both of them represented the largest stretch of border in America. You use physical barriers where necessary, use technology where necessary, heat sensors, motion detectors, aerial surveillance, drones, infrared, combined with bolstering the CBP, the Coast Guard, and the Border Patrol. That's how you you secure the border. Obviously, you're not going to have a physical barrier in the middle of the Rio Grande River or the mountain range. It's not necessary, but there are places where fencing.
It's not obvious to
serves as a
some
speed
people.
bump to slow down the tide of illegal immigration, to allow our law enforcement heroes to respond. So if we do, that's how we secure the border. It's written in law. I voted for it my first term in Congress. I haven't heard any talk about border security. It's got to be a necessary part to fix this problem. Because this is the one thing that is clear. I say to my colleagues on the right, if you carry your claim about the border, but you're not willing to give an ounce of consideration to the Dreamers, you don't really care about the Dreamers, because it's never going to get done. And so my colleagues on the left,
Of course they don't
who
care
claim
about
they
the
care about the
Dreamers.
Dreamers, but are not willing to give a dime to border security, they don't really care about the Dreamers.
They-
We know
oh
what
my
we need
God.
to do to fix this. We need more people to come to the center,
Ugh.
not allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good.
Oh man,
She has.
I wish I could.
As Professor Peza stated, if we just focus on border security, we will be right back here talking about immigration. However, as someone who values national security, we do need to make sure our borders are secure. Just simply building a wall, I believe we had a president who tried to do that and failed. That is not the only answer, but we do need to make our borders more secure. However, one of the things that I've seen the GOP fail time and time again to do is make sure there is a pathway to citizenship for the folks who are already living here. Each and every one of us here probably knows someone who had a parent or a grandparent come into the country without documents, but then was an incredible person here, helped out our economy, helped out other Americans, and we need to make sure we have pathways to citizenship for those who have helped build our country.
It's interesting because the question
So is the border secure now? I mean, that's what I've heard.
he's asking if the border is secure now, but it's a silly question because it's talking about border security versus immigration. They're two different things, which they can argue about back and forth. But immigration is not the same as border security. They are different things, different questions.
Unmitigated disaster right now. It is not even close to being secure, and it's putting every single one of us at risk. Not just from terrorists, not just from gun runners, but the fentanyl that is flowing across the border that is killing an entire generation of children. It is completely outrageous and unacceptable, and this government across the board has failed them. And it should make us all very angry. We know what the solution is. We know how to secure the border. If we can secure our houses with fencing and technology and cameras, we can secure the border. Yes, it's a lot bigger, but we're a big government, and our law enforcement officers are amazing human beings, and they want to do it. We are not allowing them to do their job right now. I should say this administration is not allowing them to do their job right now. We know what's needed to fix it, and we can marry the DREAM Act with the Border Security Act of 2017. That is the solution. Nobody's going to be in love with it completely. Everyone's going to have to compromise and sacrifice, but our nation will be safer, our kids will be safer, and it will respect the rights and dignity of our immigrant population. That's how we do it.
She has.
As someone who has actually been in combat and understands how to create secure opportunities and secure situations, there's never a one single answer that will suddenly make you incredibly secure. So yes, we do need to make sure our borders are protected and robustly protected, but we need to create pathways forward to citizenship, and it is with those two things that will make sure we are a secure country that is also open to those who are looking to come here and build a life here. But I also want to address something that Brian just mentioned, and that was terrorism. We here in our country, especially as a result and in the wake of January 6th, have seen terrorism in our country. And that was on January 6th. It is domestic terrorism. And Brian stands here as someone who first co-sponsored the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2022, and then in the same breath, voted against it. So that way he could do the DC parlor trick of telling one room one thing and the other room another. So when we stand here and talk national security, border security, security of our country, do not let him fearmonger you into believing that there is one source of terrorism. We are talking also domestic terrorism in our country. So when we talk security here in the United States, keep in mind who did not give resources to state, local, and federal law enforcement officials when he was asked to.
So I got to respond to that. Wasn't even part of the question, but if you're going to be taking these shots, they're going to be responded to. Actually, another lie, a blatant lie. The Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, the version that I co-sponsored, passed the prior Congress 435-0, Ashley. Every single member of Congress voted for it. So we co-sponsored it again, and in order to get the squad, because they did not want to vote for it, because it called out left-wing extremism along with right-wing extremism. They wanted to carve out for left-wing extremism. So they held the bill up, they changed the language, and as a result, every Republican co-sponsor voted against it.
Bounce.
Actually, we did not vote against language we co-sponsored. Was the HR number the same? Of course it is. Unfortunately, this happens a lot. But for you to say that we voted against language we co-sponsored when it unanimously passed the House, which is another failure in leadership, by the way, because that's an important bill to get done. But Democrat leadership in the House, and by the way, both parties are guilty of different things, but this lies squarely at their feet, squarely. We could have got that bill done, but in order to appease the squad and carve out a certain group of people, it is now dead in the Senate, and that's a shame.
1 minute follow.
As your Congresswoman, I will do everything in my power to make sure our communities are safe. And that means more funding for state, federal, and local law enforcement officials, be them at our southern border, or those right here at home who are going up against those with AK-47s in a household, or those who are going up against those who would do harm to other Americans. That's domestic terrorism. I will be the one to make sure more funding is given to law enforcement agencies.
Let's stay with this for a minute. Let's assume, and I believe in the Easter Bunny, so I can believe in this too. Let's assume that we pass a bipartisan bill that addresses the border and the Dreamers, and that's great. We're still faced with, I don't know, 11 million undocumented immigrants. What should be the process of dealing with them, bringing them out of the shadows, and perhaps establishing a path to citizenship? Let's try to get as specific as we can.
Yeah, you bring them out of the shadows, which is a problem across the board. When people are living in the shadows, they don't cooperate with law enforcement, they're not paying taxes, it doesn't benefit anyone. You bring them out of the shadows, you give them a provisional status that protects them, but it also doesn't allow them to jump in front of the line, because we have a lot of people that are trying to get into this country the right way and have been waiting an awful long time to do it. And the message that we have to send to everybody in America, the message that we teach our kids, if you work hard and play by the rules, you get ahead. If you cheat and cut the line, you get punished. What's going on in the border is the exact opposite of that. So as long as that's the system in place, and we respect the dignity of immigrants by giving them provisional status, they won't be deported, they'll be protected, but they have to wait in the back of the line, and there's certain requirements they have to meet in order to move up.
They will not be deported.
Yes, correct.
Ehasz?
When we look at the reality of families trying to build a life here, that is the American dream. And when I first started running for office, I talked quite a bit about the loss of the American dream for so many in our country. And so when we look at building these pathways to citizenship for those who are hardworking and don't pose a threat to our community, we need to make sure that we treat them with kindness and compassion, but that we also have a robust program that will move them through the system. Because we've all heard stories, or even maybe seen firsthand, of kids getting pulled out of schools at the mercy of a system that is broken and uncaring for them. So in Congress, I will make sure families that are not a threat to our community, that are looking to achieve the American dream themselves, are provided for.
And Bill, just to clarify, when you say no deportation, that's assuming they don't commit a crime.
No criminals, right. Let's move on to energy and the environment.
I'm just looking up why the actual reality of the filibuster happened from the GOP on the domestic terrorism bill, because he did vote against
Climate
it.
change is real and poses a
I don't see anything about the
threat
squad.
to property, health, and national security.
I see Rubio.
2, our enormous energy demands ensure that, like it or not, we will continue to be dependent upon fossil fuels for quite some time. So again, without assessing blame or dwelling on past practices, give your view of a realistic energy climate policy moving forward, and we start with Ms. Ehasz.
So we know that climate change and fighting it is a national security issue. As I've shared in a few of the remarks today, I am truly fearful of the conflict that comes around lack of water resources. That will be conflict in our future. I'm also fearful of China and Russia out developing green technologies and putting us in a competitive state with them. So we need to make sure we rise to meet this moment.
Yep.
But also right here at home, I live in Ben Salem, and we get a notification probably 2 or 3 months every 2 or 3 months to not drink our water. So we know families right here at home are also caught between, do we give our kids water right now, or do we hold off because it is not safe to drink? That is not a position we should be putting families in. And one of the other things that families are having to deal with right now is rising energy costs. One of the largest sources of energy costs for your average family member in Pennsylvania's first, gas and oil at the pump. And Brian had the opportunity to vote to make sure price gouging did not happen at the pump. Gas and oil companies are making record profits right now, trying to make up for what they lost during the pandemic, and they're doing it on the dime of the working people in this community. And Brian said, that's fine, you get a free ticket from me. So I would vote to make sure folks here are not at the whim of any gas and oil company. And as we move forward into a world that actually meets the challenge of fighting climate change, we need to make sure we have security in our own energy resources right here at home, but that we also aren't making the problem worse. So as we move away from fracking near water resources, that's a really good way to make sure folks here are not at the whim of big gas and oil companies or big energy companies who are trying to make their water undrinkable and their land uninhabitable.
Ashley,
Right.
you're going to just call it a coincidence that the second this administration shuts down the Keystone XL pipeline, stops all permitting, both on and offshore, and energy prices spike through the roof, and you want to blame all the Southern oil companies. Good luck with that, because the American public's not buying it.
Oh
from
my
one side.
God. This is
On
the
top of
actual
climate
proof.
change, I've introduced a bill along, it's a bipartisan bill with my Democrat colleague from California. It's called the Market Choice Act. It would meet or exceed the standards of the Paris Climate Accord. It also repeals the federal gas tax, which is a regressive tax that mostly hurts middle to lower income workers. And it puts us on a path to meet or exceed the Paris climate standards. The thing with the environment is it can't be a one nation project. Air does not stop at a nation's borders. And when you have certain countries, including China, that can't pollute the environment fast enough, there's got to be consequences to that. Because if American companies who are trying to stay in business, worldwide companies trying to stay in business, taking advantage of cheap labor and no environmental standards, and they can produce products cheaper, there's got to be a border adjustment tax that punishes China, countries like China, so that they're not selling our
everyone.
products back to American citizens
Just
at a
listening.
reduced price. If we're serious
I
about
pulled up
tackling the
debunk
challenge
of
of
the
climate
XL
change, it's got to be a
Keystone XL
universal
pipeline.
standard, a universal system, and for
Impacting
countries
gas
that don't
prices
comply,
right here.
there's got to be a border adjustment tax provision to it. And as far as your energy demands, all the above. We are sitting on the Saudi Arabia of natural gas in this country. We could be massively independent from an energy standpoint, a massive energy exporter, but they're not allowed to do their jobs right now. We're sitting on it right here. And by the way, that's one of the cleanest forms of energy, most environmental forms of energy that exist in that realm. And we have to unleash them.
Okay, so follow up, and how do we unleash our energy? How do we rely upon fossil fuels in the short term while we move towards something that's more climate friendly? So that's
So if I'm asked whether or not the American people will buy it, that gas and oil companies are jacking up prices on them and take advantage of them at their weakest, I think most people do. And to be told that by someone who's a part of a party where one of the major funding sources for their political campaigns is gas and oil companies,
Yep.
that's funny. Here's what we need to do. Right now, the American people, including everyone in this room, are at the whim of Saudi Arabia and OPEC and their collusion on raising gas prices to make sure folks here are feeling it at the pump and will be put in hardship. So I encourage the Biden administration, and as your Congresswoman, I will push this in office as well, to make sure we stop all of our funding and arms to Saudi Arabia until they back off of raising gas prices for families right here in Pennsylvania's first and the country at large.
Yeah, the energy policies are so bad right now that we're now begging dictators around the world to share their energy.
It's a world.
So
It's a world
hesitant to
economy.
release what's
It's a
sitting
market
right
in
beneath us that
capitalism.
can
There's a
extract it in
world
safe, clean
market,
way.
a
Create
global
American
market.
jobs, and unions are definitely behind this. And it would benefit not only our domestic economy, but our national security. It would help Europe. It would help Ukraine if we're able to supply these energy sources to Europe. Why the hesitancy of unleashing what's right beneath us right now that can be done in a clean, safe way?
thank you. All right, let's move on.
Remember that the extraction
How
of
many people are
gas is
65 in
not.
the room? Just a few.
The extraction of gas is not necessarily clean. The burning of gas is cleaner
Well,
than
it's
coal.
that time again. Like every other election year, it's once again time for senior citizens to wade through the rhetoric surrounding the threat to Social Security and Medicare, or
Wade through
linking
it.
funding to those programs on restrictions to the debt limit. In your view, what is and what should be the future of the programs? Again, please, let's not talk about the past. I want to know what these two candidates will do.
The framing of that question.
Okay, to ensure that we have adequate protections for
Like
Social
there's
Security, Medicare,
equivalents of the
and
parties
that,
on this.
And also by addressing the debt limit that we've heard so much about recently. And we start with Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, it's three things. Number one, preserve the program, never allow it to be rated. That's number one. Number two, legislation we've introduced, my office, Tax-Free Social Security Act. Social Security is a product of taxation. When you give it to the government, when it comes back to you, it should not also be taxed. It's a double form of taxation. We have legislation that
We
will
can
make
agree on
all
that
Social
one.
Security benefits tax-free. And third, to make sure that it's keeping pace with inflation, which is a particular problem right now.
It's going up 9%, by the
Social
way,
Security
this
benefits
year.
need to be attached not just to the CPI, but the CPIE, the Consumer Price Index for the elderly, which actually is higher than the CPI and tracks goods and products and services that are specific to our senior population. So we, number one, preserve the program, and number two and three, allow it to grow through relieving our seniors of the tax burden, and also attaching it to a more aggressive
How are you gonna fund
CPI
that, Brian?
index. That is, I think, the starting point, really, to saving it.
How would you fund that, Brian?
Ehasz?
Again, we are finding ourselves in a moment where I will encourage you to believe them when they show you who you are. Last week, Brian's boss, Kevin McCarthy, said they will end Social Security, especially for those on pensions and those who have 401ks, including those in unions. You know what else they told us they were going to do? They told us they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and they did. We are now in a post-January 6th, post-Roe v. Wade world. So when they say that they will overturn Social Security, believe them. And that's where I will perhaps disagree with our moderator, that this is not just rhetoric. This is what the GOP will do if they have the majority in the House when we wake up on November 9th. Believe them. So as your Congresswoman, I will make sure your money is protected. What you have paid into Social Security for your lives is not the government's money. It is yours. You have earned that, and you will be entitled to it. So I'll make sure it is protected. And yes, it does need to rise with inflation rates, which the Democrats made sure it did just that. Over this next year, folks will see almost a 10% increase in what they get, and that's because it now matches inflation.
All of
So
these.
you need someone who will protect these rights. Believe them when they say the GOP will sunset them if they gain the majority.
I want to have a follow-up before we go to the extra time. If we're talking about ensuring that Social Security is not cut and that we get cost of living increases and whatnot.
How do you fund it?
It costs money. We have to talk about how we're going to pay for it. The discussion in the news this week has been that the Republicans will tie it to the debt limit and not increase the debt limit. So how, we're either going to pay for this by raising taxes.
So functionally
or
cutting
raising
it and
debt.
destroying the program.
Yeah.
It's about smart economic policies that allow the pie to grow. So we're not all fighting over who's going to get what slice of a shrunken pie.
Reaganomics.
There's more money across the board. And that's where the point of equilibrium, there's a macroeconomic concept of supply versus demand, finding the tax rates that are perfectly in line with equilibrium, the regulatory scheme.
Which is
and
what the
benefits.
equilibrium tax rates are actually much higher than we have them currently. If you just statistically look that up in studies.
So how do we fund the increased costs?
The increased cost for Social Security? I have three bills that are going to do it. CPIE, tax-free benefits. Are you talking about how?
No, tax-free benefits.
How do you pay
means
for
less-
it?
Less revenue for the government.
Oof.
How do we fund it?
How do we raise the revenue for the government?
Yeah.
If the consumer price index and the GDP grows at a rate that it should be growing, the rate that it was growing.
This is Reaganomics. This
that
is
not growing at
this
that
is
level
bunk.
anymore,
This is bunk
that-
economics, by the
that
way.
results in more revenue to the government.
No, it doesn't.
There's no.
If
this
it
is
actually
common
did that, we would be
macroeconomic
thriving.
Yes.
Thriving with the tax
Yes?
bases.
So the way we fund it is by getting rid of the Trump tax cuts. And that will be my answer just about every time.
We don't do that.
And then
I was taking a sip, but I'm told you
you who they are. Do not believe Brian when he says he will not be a part of the movement to end your Social Security. This summer, he put forth a resolution that would have called for a constitutional convention that would, as he called it, trim the budget. It is often seen as a measure that would end Social Security. So he beat Kevin McCarthy to the punch. He has already shown his hand. And if we elect him again and give the GOP a majority, mark my words, the benefits and the entitlements that you have earned and have paid into for a lifetime will be gone.
Got to respond to that, Bill.
Sure.
So just to be clear, what Ashley just told everybody is she's going to raise both corporate and individual rates, and she's opposed to the balanced budget amendment. That's what that bill was, Ashley. It was to do exactly what we do here in the state of Pennsylvania, what our state legislators have been doing for years, is balancing our budget, just like we do in our households. Why would you be against that?
Take your time.
No.
Response? You don't have to answer the question. We don't do questions across, but you have time.
Sure. As I said, believe them when they show you who they are.
Staying with this for a minute, let's talk about the debt limit. Surely we will be faced again with the need to raise the debt limit or not. And we can shut down the government as a way of making sure we don't raise the debt limit. I'd like to know your positions on the debt limit as a way of funding this or just as a way of keeping government running. And we'll stay with the same.
Yeah, so if you marry a balanced budget amendment with eliminating the debt ceiling, I think that's the solution. We're the only country that actually has a debt ceiling, and there's more than meets the eye when it comes to this. Other countries don't ever threaten shutting the government down, and that should never ever happen in the United States.
Other
Because, by the
parties
way,
don't
it's way
threaten to
more
shut the government
expensive
down other
to
than the
shut the
Republican
government
Party.
down than it is to keep it open.
You're right.
It's dangerous to our border because our border patrol agents get furloughed.
You're right.
National security FBI agents get furloughed when they're working sensitive national security matters. So the government should never shut down, but
Yeah, it's almost like the
in
Republicans are the ones
exchange for
shutting it down.
lifting that debt ceiling, to rein in federal spending, we have to couple it with a balanced budget amendment. Again, the bipartisan solution. That's the two-party solution to get it done.
Ms. Ehasz?
When we talk
And I would
about
love to ask him
government shutdowns,
how.
when I was a commander, we went through one, and I had to look my soldiers in the eyes and tell them why their government was failing or threatening to withhold their paycheck. We do not owe any person in uniform or those working for our government to be held in that limbo. So again, when we look at where are we going to raise the revenue to make sure our country moves forward and operates productively, we go right back to the Trump tax cuts. These were cuts for the top wealthiest. And what have we seen since then? We have seen families lose their homes. We have seen families have to choose between affording prescription drugs, groceries, where their next roof over their head will be, all while the top corporations and the highest earners in our country enjoy paying less in taxes than likely any single person in this room. That is not right, and that is what we need to overturn to make sure our country is taken care of.
So Bill, just so the message is clear, for any entity that's employing people right now, as challenging as it is in this environment, under Ashley's plan, your taxes are going up. At
Disingenuous.
the worst time possible.
Totally disingenuous. That's not the case.
Okay.
Not the case.
Moving on to some foreign
Anybody that
policy issues.
understands the basis, remember,
Start with China. There's so many things we can talk about in time.
Somebody
does not
said-
permit.
there's pass-through income. It goes through to the person that owns the company. The corporate tax rate is only paid by C corporations.
In its Silk Road initiatives and has taken an increasingly aggressive posture in the Pacific Rim region. What is the most effective posture we should take toward China while strengthening our alliances with Japan, South Korea, and Australia? We start with Ms. Ehasz.
So as someone who was stationed overseas, we were very adjacent to China, and we were always having to face and talk about the direct threat militarily for us that China faced. And I do identify China as the #1 threat to our national security at this point, both economically and militarily. So economically, as we've already discussed, we need to make sure we make more things here at home. We saw during the pandemic that our reliance upon supply systems that involved China hurt us directly here at home. We lost Americans because we relied on a foreign entity to things like masks to keep folks safe. So we need to make more things here at home. But also internationally, we need to make sure we support our partners and allies, because we may need to call upon them if China acts aggressively towards us. So again, when I hear things from Kevin McCarthy that he is going to cut funding to our partners and allies when they need us most, if he gains the GOP majority in the House, that terrifies me. Because that signals to us that we are going to let Russia win in Ukraine. And what is the GOP going to do when it comes time to hold China at bay? So I will make sure we are ready to meet that moment both militarily and economically.
Fitzpatrick?
Lots to unpack there too, but I'm going to answer the question. I'm on the House Intelligence Committee. My main focus is China and countering the CCP threat. President Xi Jinping has said a couple of things that everybody should know. It's all been declassified. Number one, he says you're never going to defeat America from the outside, ever. He said the only way you take down the world's oldest and strongest democracy is from within. By
And only
infiltrating
one
our
party
supply
is doing
chains and
that, by
turning
the way.
American un-American. He's gone so far as to identify what he calls the 5 spheres of American influence. He's identified traditional media, he's identified social media / big tech, he's identified academia, he's identified Hollywood / entertainment, and he's identified professional sports. He said if we can infiltrate the supply chains of those 5 cultural influencers of American conduct, we can take America down from within. And we're seeing evidence of it. We're seeing evidence in academia of something called the Confucius Institutes, which are being built out. They're spreading like wildfire throughout America. They're being built out as these cultural exchange programs, but they're really nothing more than an extension of the Ministry of Education of the CCP. We're seeing it in sports. We're seeing it in entertainment with AMC movie theaters, which is heavily invested in China. They own 8 out of 10 movie theaters in America. We're seeing it across the board. President Xi is on a mission to make the yuan replace the dollar as the world's currency standard. He wants to replace the United States of America as the world's military and economic superpower. And he believes he's on track to do it. With the development of the Pacific Rim, with his sights set on Taiwan, with his Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, 54 countries in Africa, he's got active development, including rare earth mineral mining in all 54 nations. He's now focused on South America, in our own hemisphere. And it's a very serious threat. I have a piece of legislation with my co-chair on the problem solvers, Josh Gottheimer, a Democrat from New Jersey's 5th District, that is the most aggressive, ambitious, hold China accountable bill that has ever been introduced in the U.S. House. And that's going to be our focus, is to get that done.
Ehasz?
I agree with Brian that China is a threat to our country, to our national security. I also feel that Russia is too. And again, I will make sure this point is crystal clear. I am not part of a party or an institution that has said, hey, on November 9th, we are going to go to those who need us most, our partners and allies, and end funding for them in their crusade, in their war, in their fight against one of the biggest aggressors nationally, Russia. Because I think when we look at, again, where folks are going to move, believe them when they tell you who they are, when the moment comes to face China, I do not trust the GOP to meet that moment and make sure our partners and allies have the funding they need, so that we can potentially fight against them. Believe them when they tell you who they are.
We're going to talk about Ukraine more.
Yes, next question. Mr. Wonsinette, are you ready to go? Okay. Simple question. Will you agree to continue support for Ukraine? And if so, what additional weapon systems should be provided?
Pretty specific question.
Start with Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yep, so I was in Ukraine, I lived there. It was my last international assignment as an FBI agent. I was there once just pre-invasion. I've been there twice post-invasion, including into Kyiv, and down all the way down to Odessa, the most pivotal area of the coast. And the trajectory originally, when Russia was coming down from the north in Belarus, was they needed air protection. They needed S-300 surface-to-air missiles from Bulgaria, Poland, and the Baltics. They needed TB2 drones from Turkey, and they needed MiGs from Poland and the United States. They got some, they didn't get all what they needed. When the war footing changed to the Donetsk region, it became more of an artillery slugfest. What their needs are now are the HIMARS system, the multi-rocket launch system. They need about 100 a day. We're only capable, because of supply chain problems in our own country, we're only capable of giving them about 10 a day. And we need our European allies to step up. Volodymyr Zelensky knows that he does not have a stronger ally in Congress than myself. He knows that. I'm going to go back shortly after the election to see the entire leadership team. As long as I am there, I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that our friends and allies in Ukraine, who are 30 years into their independence, 30 years, and it's being snatched away from them like that. Poland has been tremendous. They're going to get every last ounce of support they need as long as I'm on that floor of the House.
Ehasz?
So I had one of my mentors in the service told me, you know you can tell a good officer when they talk tactics, but you can tell a great officer when they talk logistics. So when I look at aiding our friends in Ukraine, as someone who has actually flown helicopters in combat and was a maintenance commander and had to keep these things flying and keep folks in the air, when I look at where we need to make sure resources are put in place for our friends and allies in Ukraine, it's making sure the weapon systems they currently have can continue to be used as they move forward. So that means resources for maintenance, spare parts, make sure they have fuel, and make sure they have the proper funding to care for those soldiers who are going into harm's way. Because it is one thing to have the resources, it is another to make sure you can continuously use them for the days and months and potentially years that follow. And that is how you can tell someone who is simply just a tactician versus those who are a good logistician and actually understand strategic engagement.
Thank you. Last question. You can applaud that if you like.
Oh my
We
God.
live in turbulent times. On January 6, 2021, we witnessed the most violent assault on our nation's capital in history. Today, following 2 years of relentless repetition of the false claim that the 2020 election was stolen, as many as 35 to 40% of Americans believe that to be true. We've had to provide protective barriers around the Capitol and Supreme Court building for fear of additional violence. A Siena College poll shows that 70% of Americans believe that democracy is in danger. Partisan tribalism is at its peak, and it's not just in America. We see a rise of anti-democratic sentiment in Europe as well.
Rise of
How can
fascism.
we restore faith in our democratic institutions and stop the grandstanding? We start with Ms. Ehasz.
You do that by electing officials who will actually hold those who did harm on January 6th accountable, and by electing officials who will stand up to the tyranny of the former president and his cronies. Full stop. If I may continue.
Sure.
We currently have an elected official in Bryan who voted against, in the final vote to actually form the January 6th committee, voted against it. That is him saying that those who did harm to police officers on January 6th, those who saw other Americans as the enemy, did not need to be held accountable. He also, in the wake of January 6th, voted to not impeach the former president, who at that time had clearly and convincingly committed impeachable crimes. And once more, in that time between the election in 2020 and January 6th, when it really looked like President Trump was going to push the election as a fraud narrative, Bryan sent a letter on November 7th, 2020 to the governor of our Commonwealth saying, hey, we should maybe look into some election fraud here in Pennsylvania. He didn't ask for it for his own election. He was somehow rightfully elected in 2020, but there were issues somewhere else.
Good point.
And then when the moment came after January 6th where he would have to stand up and defend democracy, he failed. Bryan and I took the same oath to defend our Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And he failed that oath. I took it when I was 17, and I have not failed it once. He is someone who's been in office since 2016, is paid by all of our dollars in this room. And the one moment of courage we needed from him, he failed us.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yep. So
Good
another
answer.
lie, Ashley. You're saying I voted against the formation of the bipartisan January 6th commission? That is a lie. I voted for the bipartisan commission that was originally put on the floor of the House. That was based, by the way, we helped draft this. That was modeled after the 9/11 commission. It was equally bipartisan.
He
One
voted
Democrat,
against
one
what
Republican.
actually came of it,
contained
the
no current members
bipartisan
of
one.
Congress, no elected officials. Both of them are necessary. So when we passed it, by the way, our caucus endorsed it. I voted for it on the floor of the House, had dozens and dozens of my Republican colleagues. I got to vote yes for that. And then it stalled. So what did Democrat leadership do, Ashley? They could have taken that same model and we would have all supported it again in a House-only version, but they didn't do that. They decided to create a select committee of 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And by the way, the 2 Republicans were selected by the 7 Democrats. How can anybody take that seriously, Ashley? How can anybody take that seriously? They had the model that would have worked. And shame on them for not doing that, because I supported that formation of that system.
The Republicans actually
And
sunk
as
that,
far as
by the
what can
way.
be done, we got to do 2 things. We got to call out deniers when we see them that are pushing out false narratives. And we
Oh,
also gotta
Ashley should
secure our
ask.
elections.
Ashley
We
should
also
ask
gotta
about
do that,
Mastriano.
because that's part of what's upsetting so many people.
Oh,
Ashley,
please.
and you're talking about this
Oh,
letter.
please.
When I have constituents come to me, and this is part of the job of a representative, that have significant concerns about, even if it's just the optics of an election, where signatures don't have to match, which deadlines don't matter anymore, where photo ID rules are getting thrown out the window. That's a legitimate concern by good people that care about and love America. You don't disregard them.
So loud.
I find it interesting that someone who is saying we need to look into our election systems and protect the right to vote, voted against the Voting Rights Protection Act. That to me, I don't get it. And again, folks, I've stood up here and reminded you a couple times throughout this debate to believe people when they tell you who they are. I didn't need that many words to tell you that I would vote to defend our Constitution and our democracy. That's all I need to say.
Ah. I wish
Another
she.
lie, Ashley.
I wish she
voted
had
for
pressed
the
them.
John Lewis Voting Rights Act. When it came back to the House and they stripped out the voter ID provision, you better believe I voted against it. Because voter ID is supported by 80% of the community that I represent, the community that you're seeking to represent, Ashley. So maybe we can talk about voter ID. Maybe we should talk about that. That's an 80% issue in this district. It's critically important to secure democracy because regardless of whether it diminishes substantive fraud, and I used to run this unit as an FBI agent, actually. I ran the election crimes program for the entire country. If it gives people more security, more confidence in the outcome of an election, then why not do it? If you need a voter ID to rent a car, to enter an office building, to do virtually anything,
You don't need the
but
same
we're not going
ideas.
to require a voter ID to vote?
To rent a car,
How does
you
that
need
make
a
any
driver's
sense? And
license
what's
because
the
you need to
objection? And by the
drive.
way, we have a bill that we're about to introduce. It makes it free to anybody who can't afford it. So there's no
How about
economic
free to
harm
everybody?
it. There's no reason not to do this. It gives people faith and confidence in the outcome of elections, which is the most important thing to secure our democracy.
You have to pass that bill first before you can require voter ID.
We're actually out of time. We're going to have 30-second closing statements from both candidates. I'm going to make an announcement before as they gather their thoughts. The last day to request a mail-in ballot is November 1st.
Don't
We have the legal
Don't
window
request
voters in the back
a
of
mail-in
the room
ballot at
who
this
are
point. Go to
there
your
with,
Board of Elections and vote.
applications for you if you want to take one. And those completed ballots, signed and
Yesterday was the
dated,
last day of
must
registration.
arrive at the county election office by November 8th. I'm not aware of no picture. Okay, take a picture. Oh, okay. Well, don't take a picture. So again, you can pick up a request for a ballot in the back of the room from legal women voters, and that ballot must arrive at the county election board by November 8th. And we're going to start with Mr. Fitzpatrick for his closing statement.
Yep, thank you, Bill, for moderating, Ashley, for participating, Dr. Ganther, the amazing team at the Bucks County Community College. We love you. You're doing a tremendous public service, raising and educating our brilliant youth that are going to be the future leaders of America. We are blessed to live in a country, the greatest country that God's ever created, a country that's done more good for more people and more nations than any other nation ever has and any other nation ever will. We are so fortunate. And we are also fortunate to live in a part of the country that brought it all to the world. 1776, the idea of independence that came out of Independence Hall, which was won here in Bucks County on Christmas night of 1776, the turning point of the revolution. And then 11 years later in September 1787, the Great American Compromise, where people didn't say, if I don't get everything I want, I'm going to take my marbles and go home. That's not what they did. They said, you know what, for the good of our country, we're going to create the Great American Experiment, a system of government that's never been tried anywhere on the planet. But when Ben Franklin emerged, and he approached that courier, and he said, sir, what kind of government have you given us? The paper boy asked Ben Franklin. He said, a republic, if you can keep it. And he emphasized the second part, because while he was saying that we created a brilliant system of government that's never been tried anywhere, 3 branches of government, each separate and co-equal to the other, if you can keep it, he was telling this young boy how fragile the system of government is. How do we preserve this 246-year experiment that we've been so blessed to live in?
Both for the
Bipartisanship.
Democratic
Stop
Party.
viewing fellow Americans as the enemy. And
True,
start focusing
true,
on our
but
real threats
don't.
externally, like Xi Jinping and the Ayatollah, and Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un, and the people that want to overtake us and replace our currency. That's what I believe in, and that's what our district knows I believe in. I thank you for your time.
Obviously, we have more time.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. Bill, thank you for moderating. Ryan, thank you for joining me here. We discussed many important issues here in front of you all today. However, I am appalled that there was only one question asked about a woman's right to choose.
It's so loud. I'm sorry.
Let me remind you that standing on this stage today as a combat veteran, as a young woman, as someone who grew up working class right here in southeastern PA, I am standing on this stage a second-class citizen, made so at the hands of Brian Fitzpatrick. So let me ask you, Brian has been in office since 2016. Are you really better off because of it? The answer is no, especially every woman in this room who is watching and women across America. So our community deserves a leader who will fight with courage and match the values of Pennsylvania's first. That leader is no longer Brian. I believe I am that leader that Bucks and Montgomery counties deserve. And so I'm so grateful to have introduced myself to you all today, to share with you my priorities when I am your future Congresswoman, or when I am your Congresswoman. And I want to make sure this community is cared for, our country is cared for, and our democracy is cared for. Thank you.
So loud. Oh my god. The sound quality of the stream is a little rough, so I apologize for that. But I'm appreciative of the stream.
Thank both of these individuals. It's not easy to put your name on a ballot, hold yourself up for public scrutiny, take the abuse and the criticism and the long hours of the campaign. And I admire what you've done to offer yourselves to the voters.
The last thing to do is just like watch them shake hands and stuff like that.
That if you're fortunate enough to win this election, you'll come back to this stage next time and have another election and have another debate. I saw you nod yes. Okay, there it is. Write that down for yourself. Please.
Again, sorry, clapping. It's a little sharp.
Respect and the fact that you're here showing that interest, you should give yourselves an applause. And don't forget to get a
They just keep keep clapping. Oh, looks like the stream ended, so we don't see if the handshake occurred. The handshake at the end that everyone will analyze. So my thoughts on this debate. I think Ashley did a very good job. I think on some, and we can go over maybe specifics, but I think on some questions better than others. I think I was getting texts and whatnot throughout, and yeah, like the pushback on the bipartisan whatever thing that Fitzpatrick does is tough, because he does that 1 foot in, 1 foot out thing where he'll vote for something when he knows it won't pass, then he'll vote against it when it's the real vote. And that's the trick that he pulls out. And it's a GOP trick. It's something that he knows that he has to do to sell this bipartisan image. Like the domestic terrorism bill, like the January 6th commission. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. He will vote for things when it's convenient for him. He'll get out there and do that stuff. But when it comes to brass tacks, he does not vote the right way. Ashley should have Yeah, no questions on education. That is a bummer, especially with regards to like teachers in particular. But I think the overemphasis on foreign. These are questions submitted by viewers in theory, and the overemphasis on foreign policy, I should say, seems to be more on both of them are fine on it. It's just that it seems like that's like a plant for a Fitzpatrick person to send in because of his experience on it. Ashley has it as well, but because that's their emphasis is the Chinese government, et cetera, et cetera. Although it is a real problem, it is a bit of a hyper focus compared to the rest of issues. I mean, the same thing with immigration. Like we don't really get a lot on healthcare. We didn't get anything on education, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of specifics that don't really apply to a congressperson in this debate. The issues were not so myopic's not the right word, but localized. And that's an issue. I wish, and Ashley did it. I do wish that Ashley kind of hammered home that at that one point where she could have the election denialism of the Republican Party and tying him to Mastriano. It's one thing to tie Fitzpatrick to Trump, but at this point, Mastriano is at the top of the ticket. So that is something that it's not a lost opportunity because she did it, but it could have been like emphasized a little bit more. That could have been something better, but I think overall the questions were the right answers, and especially like when it comes to Social Security, you ask anytime a Democrat supports something increase in spending, they're supposed to have a way to fund it. Now, I wish that people understood the intricacies of like the Social Security tax, how to do it. I mean, I could talk through it at any point, but Democrats have proposed different types of things, like a donut hole and increasing the tax rate over $250,000 to do it. And remember, Social Security is its own separate tax pool versus the actual regular income tax. And all that stuff matters, but like Fitzpatrick didn't even have an answer to it. And he's a CPA. He has a CPA, or he did. So that's a little evident of saying like, yeah, like he is, the plan is to cut it. That is the plan for them. And the emphasis over and over and over again on that. It's on message, on brand, and on point from Ashley the whole time. And we will see how the media spins it, because the local media, some others, don't really give credence to a lot of the Democratic principles a lot of the time. So we will see in the fallout of this what actually comes of it. But while I have you here, thank you guys for watching this debate on this show. I will try to do this again, and we will do some election coverage over the next couple of weeks. If you enjoy it, hit the subscribe button to the YouTube channel right below. Hit the thumbs up. There will be no other show this week. There will be clips coming out this week as well, though. So stay tuned for that. The audio version of this will be on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you can find your podcast. So do go find that. And, if you support the program for as little as $5 a month at patreon.com/Greater Society Media, that would really be cool. Social media, you can follow the show, Greater Society Media, on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter at Connor OHanlon. And with all of that being said, thank you so much for hanging out. Get your ballots back. Get ready to vote. Make a plan to vote, whatever you have to do. And until next time, stay safe. Peace.